Okay, looks like we can start. Hello, everyone. I'm Hub Brown. I'm the Associate Dean for Research, Creative Activity, and Initiatives and International Initiatives in the Newhouse School. I'm here with some very special guests, and so I'd like to welcome you to our discussion on diversity in the media industry. And I will be introducing our special guests in just a moment. There are a couple of things that I wanted to mention beforehand, though, just to sort of center us. The last few days have been very sad ones at the Newhouse School as we have marked the passing of our dear, dear friend and colleague, Sherry Taylor. Sherry Taylor taught graphic arts and graphic design for more than 30 years within the Newhouse School. An incredibly valued member of our community. She is already being missed by so many people, and she's touched the lives of thousands of students. And so I wanted to make sure we mark that at the moment and let you all know that there will be a community service for grief and healing that's coordinated by Hendricks Chapel that starts at 6 p.m. And so some of you students on the call may want to join that. Some of you alumni on the call may want to join that. And so we will have the link for that in the chat. Apparently it's coming up right there. So again, just wanted to touch base on that and to let you all know that we're all thinking about Sherry's family, and we're missing her already. Turning the page now, we want to get into our discussion here. And that discussion is going to be wide-ranging, inclusive of a lot of really interesting topics at this point, because it is such an incredible moment, I think, in the discussions around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I want to start by introducing Tara Donaldson. Tara is a 2012 graduate and the executive editor of WWD and head of diversity and inclusion at Fairchild Media. And then also with us is Jay Francis. And Jay is class of '84 and VP of current series and diversity at Disney Television Animation. And there's a whole lot we can talk about here, folks. Welcome, both of you. I'm excited about this. There's so many things to talk about, but I want to jump in real quick first to talk about really this year, 2020 as a year, and what kind of things, because of everything that's been going on this year. How do you think our experiences from Black Lives Matter to COVID to everything have changed our discussions around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then also maybe changed your work, changed your job? So Tara, I'm going to go to you first.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. I think there's been no shortage of things going on in 2020. What feels different is that now more people are starting to pay attention to conversations Black people and people of color have been having forever. Um, you know, we've always been told to kind of stay in our lane, keep your head down, do your work. But this is now a time for speaking out. And I guess for me, where I realized things were different in this moment, after George Floyd's killing, I wrote an article to the fashion industry kind of saying, hey, you're doing a lot of things wrong and you're not bringing enough voices to the table. And here's what else you've done wrong. And you're not paying attention to the garment workers who are also people of color. You're not taking care of them, and just kind of going all out to call out the industry. And I got an email from our big boss, who falls into the camp of a white executive who hasn't, necessarily been as inclusive as we could be, we should be. And I received an email of congratulations and thanks from him. So it's kind of like the conversation's definitely changing, because in the past you would be afraid for your job to have written something like that. So I think people are forced to pay attention, and they're now forced to take action. So I feel like at least that's one positive outcome from all that has gone awry this year.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about some of those challenges as well. But Jay, let you in here. What kinds of things in your environment have really changed as this year has progressed?
Well, first of all, thank you as well for having me
Hmm.
today. I'm honored to be here. Um, well, look, let's start with the fact that if you have diversity and inclusion in your title, your job has dramatically changed since May 25th. And, whatever priorities or focus that you had in your role, and not just in the entertainment industry, but in whatever setting you've had, whatever those priorities were initially, sort of have changed exponentially. And for me specifically, it meant refocusing from the sort of outward talent reach idea to taking care of people internally. To Tara's point, none of this stuff was new to us. If you've been working long enough, you've learned at this point how to compartmentalize. Tara referred to as staying in your lane, and for me, it's been a thing where it's just like I have acknowledged what's in all the sort of companies that I've worked at and all the situations of a sort of checking in on, am I the only one who looks like this in the meeting? Okay, let me look at that. Okay, yeah, more often than not it is. Doesn't change my tone or tenor of the meeting, but it's almost like instinctually we do that because that's what we have been, in essence, trained to do over the course of our career. So look, in the entertainment industry, you have several layers here. You look at it from the, what's in front of the camera on the screen, and from a content standpoint, and what's behind the scenes, who is making those decisions, who are the people behind the scenes who have an opportunity to lead, and so that's sort of the paradox of the business that we're in, just from the standpoint of if it's very layered. So I continue to do my talent outreach. That's always been my focus and will continue to do so. But there's now a commitment to training. There's now a commitment to having some of these conversations, awkward and messy as they may be, but having those. And again, sort of referencing Tara, it's just like, these are conversations that just weren't even thought about, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, So combined, the pandemic with the social unrest and out here in Southern California, even wildfires, it's been quite a traumatic year, to say the least.
Or hasn't it? Tara, how did you feel when you got that note, the note of support? Because I'm hearing that's like a time in your career that, or an event in your career that, well, you don't take for granted. It doesn't happen that often.
Yeah, well, I called my dad and I was like, my boss just sent me an email thanking me for calling him out and calling out everyone in the industry. And when you think of the 60s and 70s, the period that my dad would have witnessed, he was like, what? So I felt surprised, but also appreciative. Like you're listening, at least now for the first time. I can speak up and you're hearing me. So it was an interesting moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's tremendous, I think when you're working in this for a long, long time, I think there are things you go through at this point. I think there are some changes in terms of your feelings because it used to be that when you were doing this kind of work in diversity, equity, and inclusion, you really are sort of speaking to the choir. There's all those folks who are just with you in all of this, and it seems, at least now, like that has expanded somewhat. And were you a little skeptical of that in the beginning, and are you skeptical about it now? Jay, you want to take that one first?
Oh,
Oh, I'm
sure.
sorry.
Well, and I have a similar experience to Tara in
Mhm.
my division at Disney. um, I got a sincere, there's a sincerity in terms of people wanting to change. And, you know, I understand that that's not true in every situation. In a lot of situations, that's not true. So I think Tara and I are very fortunate from the standpoint that, you know, there seems to be that support. So, but, you know, look, ultimately results matter, right? So the intentionality, the commitment to this work is very important, but ultimately we have to see results. So, you know, what we're doing right now and how we sort of measure that right now, you almost can't do it right now. You know, there's things that are happening, there's things in the works. But I think this is one of those situations where the dust has not settled. And from that standpoint, would love to come back a year from now and have this conversation and see if our answers are the same, you know. So to that end, I wanted to sort of comment on that. So refresh my memory on the actual question you asked me. Because I wanted to follow up on that really quickly in Tara's response.
Well, I just wanted to know that, were you able to sort of trust that was a real thing? Was it you know, the sort of outpouring, I think, of perhaps sympathy or perhaps alliances that came out and things like that? Did it feel sincere to you then? Does it feel sincere to you now?
Yes, it does. I will also say, however, that in the heat of the moment and in the urgency, you know, there was a different tone and vibe to it, which, you know, look, I think the human nature is such that we react differently in the moment, right? You know, and then we get a little bit of space and time to sort of calculate, okay, this is a good start. We've opened up this lid. You know, people are now looking at this. We're having these conversations. There's an awareness that obviously people like God, we've always had, but now there's an awareness in terms of others who just maybe hadn't seen it or, you know, turned a blind eye to it. So, so now you go about the plans of what are your goals? How are you going to fix it? What are your tangible goals? And I think that's the space we're in right now. And, you know, there's one step forward and a couple step backs and a couple step forwards, just because there's no blueprint. There's no book on how to handle this, right? We're talking about years and years and years of systemic racism. And so how do you sort of, even with the want and the intent there, it's just like, okay, we all want to do this. How do we do it? And look, notwithstanding the color of my skin or the title that I have, I'm no expert either. You know, all I can go off of is what I feel, what I see, the emotions that I have, and being able to now be in a position to call it out in a more, I wouldn't say forceful way, but a more, I guess, intentional way, you know, because I was asked to do so. You know, I was asked to sort of, hey, we really want your point of view here. We need your point of view. And, you know, and I was happy to do that, with the caveat that, you know, like everything else, the Black race isn't monolithic. You know, my opinions are those of Jay Francis, not, you know, the Black race. So, you know, so you have that. So that's what I'm saying. You have that back and forth too. It's just like people looking for you for leadership and guidance, especially our Black employees, which I was happy to be a part of and be on the front lines of. But at the end of the day, it's like, you still have to remain true to what your truth is. And, you know, you reference my year of graduation, so it's now out there. You know, 1984. I've been in this business for a while. Some of my opinions are not so much the sort of black and white of it, but generational. You know, you know, my age group has seen different things. You know, and so I'm reacting to experience and what have you. But what I think is true is that the fact of the matter is that there's a sincere want to change in my organization, and that's what I'm most proud of. And to that end, it's certainly a company worth fighting for, and I'm happy to do so. So that's what I sense right now. The answer to that question right now is very much so. I feel like there is that want to change.
Tara, what do you think about that? The sincerity of the moment, and then how things are happening now for you?
Well, I think we all have to have a healthy level of skepticism, right? Because we have been here before. And I think certainly there were comments that were sincere and some that were less so. I think in my organization in particular, that same boss, made some commitments and has delivered on them. So we're starting to see the change already. And so it's like, let's pick this up, as Jay said, in a year's time and see what has happened.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the fashion industry in particular, a lot of brands faced backlash because they were posting the Black squares on social media. They were saying, we commit to our Black employees, we commit to our Black customers. And then you kind of dig deeper and you're like, well, you have no Black executives, you have no Black people on your board of directors, you have no people of color on your board of directors. So are you really sincere? Are you really committed to this community, to these communities? Are you really doing that work? So I think, a little bit of both. Some companies, some people are coming from a place of greater authenticity than others, certainly.
Yeah, I think some of the sources of skepticism come because of sort of those initial efforts, and people see maybe see on the magazine, for example, they may see Black images and things like that, and then wonder if it goes any deeper. And now we're beginning to see those questions explored, right?
Certainly, because now you open a magazine, all the models are Black, all the everybody's Black in the magazine, which is great. You're like, it's nice. But behind that, as you said, what's happening in your organization? Are you putting people in positions of leadership? Are you letting them make decisions? Are you letting them influence how this business goes forward? So it is going down a couple of layers to see what work is really happening.
Mm-hmm. Very good. I want to remind people that if you do have questions, go ahead and place those questions in the Q&A, and we'll get to them as we as they come up. I'll put them to our great guests here. Jay, I wanted to chat with you for a moment about I guess sort of the rip from the headlines story around Disney's disclaimer, Disney Plus disclaimers that went down. The interesting thing about that is, if for those of you who hadn't seen the news item, the content, some of the older movie content within Disney Plus, which clearly in many cases has images, scenes that are, some of them were basically elements of their time. There's racism in there. There's all kinds of things in there. And so, yes, I think that Disney, in putting out the statement that it has, allowing that content to continue to be there, but setting it up in a, within a statement. And I believe I have that statement. I'm not going to share the screen, but it basically, could I read that for you?
Sure,
read that,
please.
Jay?
Yeah.
Okay. So the statement that Disney, Disney Plus actually puts on there with their content is the following. This program includes negative depictions and or mistreatment of people or cultures. These stereotypes were wrong then and are wrong now. Rather than remove this content, we want to acknowledge its harmful impact, learn from it, and spark conversation to create a more inclusive future together. It's a very interesting approach. What was the thinking that went into that, Jay?
Well, certainly that is not my specific area of our company, but I will say this, that it's consistent with what, even in our division, we've had to go through. You can't really have any sort of change without first owning and taking and being accountable for what the situation is, right? And that's, sort of circling back to the earlier question about sincerity. That's the first thing that had to happen. There had to be a sort of owning the problem, because if you can't own that, or if you sort of put that to the side and still try to do this, you won't have people following you, So, the question of, in that statement that you read, I feel that's consistent with what, our senior leadership has done in our division in terms of, before anything can happen, we got to own some stuff here. And I think that's what's happened there. And I'm in agreement with that statement, because look, some of these movies we're talking about are considered classics or heritage, right? And from that standpoint, you need to really get in front of that, because they're, whether you're talking about Dumbo or you're talking about Pinocchio or some of these where classics are, I like the idea that they're owning it by keeping it in. That's the perspective I have. So they're not trying to sort of say, well, this never happened and we were never like this. No, on the contrary, this did happen, and it's even true in the parks as well. When the reconfiguration of Splash Mountain from the sort of the Song of the Southlands to the Princess and the Frog. I think that's sort of an acknowledgement. And there are other small things at the park like that too that are being sort of looked at as well. Even earlier Pirates of the Caribbean had sort of a changeover. So I think, first of all, it's owning up to these issues, getting in front of it so that you can then really start to make a change. So what I feel is like, from that standpoint, I like the fact that even after you read that statement, there is a website that you can click on to have a deeper dive into the conversation. So I think that's a really good way, an appropriate way to sort of acknowledge what's true, and then talk about what we need to do collectively to move forward and fix some of this stuff. So I think that was very wise of them to do that. And I think there's more work to be done there. I mean, we're sort of referencing, we're sort of pointing out the offensive stereotypes and racial stereotypes of the content. For us in the content business, we have to go above and beyond that. We have to sort of lean into creating content that is that takes into account different cultures, different heritage, because it's the right thing to do, but if I can't convince you that it's the right thing to do, at least acknowledge from a business standpoint that it's good for business. The broader your audience is, and the more that people feel like they belong. Look, especially in the kids business, where self-esteem and empowerment is so important. You see a positive, you see yourself reflected on screen in a positive way. That brings up an energy and a motivation, especially as a kid, to want to move forward and want to move up and feel good about who they are, what they look like, their experiences, their culture. That's incredibly important. And especially when you're sort of referencing the fact that we're authentic storytellers. So if we're going to be authentic, then it has to be authentic, and like I said earlier, in front of the screen, but also has to be authentic behind the screen. So to the point, and sort of Tara was references that you can have all the black models you want in the magazine, but if the people behind the scenes are not black or people of color as well, then you're only halfway doing your job. And then you can always sort of look to, is that really the authentic presentation that we want? So I think that's the space we're in right now. And that's sort of the role that I play in terms of talent outreach. My job is to find, underrepresented talent that wouldn't necessarily be on our radar if we were doing business the same way, going to the same high profile art schools or going to the same sort of agencies and whatnot to find our talent. There's a lot of good people in all of those areas, but we have to embrace more of, embrace more than just the sort of, hey, we've always gone to this school, we've always gone to this agency. We need to spread our wings a little bit and make sure that at the very least, you're getting more people invited to the party.
Mm-hmm. Tara, I think that's something that with my colleagues in the magazine department and industry, that's something that's a pretty big factor as well. The notion that the network of people that you go to for talent, for ideas, those sorts of things, has been so small. And what was that? What was that like before this moment for you in the industry and just the nature of how people sort of connect to other people, and pretty soon you have sort of one really series of thoughts about what to do in a magazine, or what to do to express fashion as communication and culture, as storytelling.
Well, I mean, I guess I had the benefit of, before WWD, I was at Sourcing Journal, and it was a small team and 3 Black women on the team. So, which, I mean, for the size of the team, was probably like 30% of the organization. And we were 3 of the key decision makers. So we were able to influence both the conversation and both kind of how we look at hiring. Can we do outreach to more places, more people? And as you said, everything is word of mouth, it's connections, it's referrals. So we also, as people of color, have a duty to help bring our people up, to help kind of say, hey, what about this person? They're really good. Even if it's not for a role that I'm hiring for, it's like, okay, my sister publication has an opening and I know this person. What about this person? So it's like, yes, we have to do the work. We have to go to more schools, but we also need to build relationships with our staff members of color who may also know people, and make sure that they're being able to refer other people of color.
Is that the key then to expanding that net? I mean, how would you both talk about getting past the same connections, getting past and quite frankly, getting past the same schools? I know that's probably something we shouldn't say here, but getting past the same places for talent out there. How do you spread that wide net?
Well, for me, it was sort of when I took on an expanded role, because I'm also on the creative side as well, but when I expanded my role into sort of talent outreach from a D&I perspective, I had asked myself that same question, like, again, not being an expert in this, was like, well, how do I do this? And, so it starts with, first of all, just being open to meeting people. I think one of the challenges that, a company like Disney faces, all the time, is the fact that people, look, it's incredibly competitive to get a job at Disney. It's an iconic company, a lot of competition. But in just talking to people, what I was hearing is just like, people couldn't even get a conversation with someone like me inside. And that's one of the places that I wanted to change. I wanted to make sure that, notwithstanding the challenges of getting into Disney, that making myself available as much as I can to having one-on-one conversations, and telling it, quote unquote, like it is from my perspective, whether it's as a writer, as an artist, as an animator, a production person, just like being able to, so that people have that sort of one-on-one connection. So you have to make a commitment to that. And the way I do that specifically is, I'm not incredibly active on social media, but LinkedIn would be my social media of choice. And people have sort of just out of the blue just sort of said, hey, I would love to have a little chat with you about advice on, and I try to set that up as much as I can, much to the chagrin of my assistant who, because I basically never say no. So I have, I have meetings galore, meet and greets galore, but that's step number one. I looked in the chat and the question answered real quick, and the issue of schools came up. And I will say this, that, there have been very few silver linings when it has come to this pandemic. But one of the silver linings that I have found is that I am now able to do quadruple the amount of school presentations that I would have had it not been for this, because giving presentations via Zoom has allowed me to get to, since the pandemic started, probably up to 35 school presentations now in one form or another, where typically in a given year, if I'm lucky, 6 or 7, just based on schedule, budget, and what have you. So to that end, and even prior to the pandemic, I had sort of pointed out schools that I wanted to go to. There were certainly some high profile, like if I'm focusing on writers, there's going to be high profile screenwriting programs that, it makes sense to visit very specifically. But I also needed to go to schools that catered to a diverse population, whether it's the HBCUs or a more Latinx based community and the Cal State programs, do a lot more presentations and outreach to organizations that have writing programs and art programs that sort of cater to a certain diverse population. So there's groups like Ghetto Film School and CAPE and Women in Animation, these type of organizations that I'm going to do outreach at that, again, might not have been on our radar. So yeah, the high profile schools, there's an obligation. I mean, obviously there's diverse talent at those schools as well, but we haven't limited it to that. And that's the difference here. And so, you'll find me giving a presentation at Columbia, and then the next day you'll find me giving a presentation at Delta State in Mississippi. I'll be at NYU, and I'll also be at Grand Valley State in Michigan. So for me, that's the outlook that I've had, is to sort of connect and develop relationships with organizations that cater to diverse talent and schools as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and since you brought up that talent, and you both represent a tremendous amount of talent that is a part of our industries. Tara, I want to come to you first, but I'm going to ask you both to, as we're talking about these connections that you all are making at the college level, start with your journey as a college student to the place you are now. What does that roadmap look like for you? How did you get from where you were then, as just like the students who may be on this call, to where you are now?
Good question. I actually came to Newhouse largely because of Cheshire's travel writing course, and I was set on being a travel writer, and that was my entire focus. And she brought an editor from CNN to our class one day, and he had written a book about the Caribbean, where my heritage is. And the chapter he wrote on my island, I was like, this isn't even good. This isn't, so I just, like, this is not accurate. But so, I had a conversation with him, but most importantly, he put up on the screen, a piece that they had received from their best editor, their best contributor. And I was like, but that's not that good. So, I mean, that's not anything that I can't do or some of my classmates can't do. So I approached him after the class and I said, are you open to taking pitches? And he said, yes. And I pitched him. And he actually was really good at kind of working with me to improve my piece. And then I continued to write with him. And then he went to different publications and he still let me write for him. Long story short, travel writing, that's not where I ended up, because my undergrad was in merchandising and marketing. So I took a job in a trade publication, which I remember our professors saying, don't ignore the trade. It's not glitzy and, consumer facing and what you think you might want to do. But it was actually the best decision I made because it was a small organization and I had an opportunity to do everything. And then very quickly, I was the head editor of that publication, very quickly, as in like maybe 2 years. So then I continued to make relationships and so on. And then that company was bought by Penske Media, which owns Women's Wear Daily. So then as part of a bigger publishing company, you now have other opportunities to sort of move within the organization. So that was essentially how I got there. So I would say certainly no opportunity should be overlooked for what it could provide for you.
Yeah, and certainly the opportunities that you may not think are the big ones, the glamorous ones, might lead you to something that's more in line with what you really want to do in the industry. We're hopefully getting that message out to a lot of students these days. Jay, talk to me about that through line from graduating in a year that I won't mention again to where you are, right now.
Well, I kind of have to mention it again in order for the story to work because, right after I graduated from Syracuse, the one thing that was driving me was getting out of the cold. So I headed out to LA even back then. And when I went out to, so I graduated with a TV film production degree, but I didn't go out to LA thinking, I want to be a director, I want to be a producer, I want to be a writer. I just went with, I want a job in the entertainment industry and figured let the journey sort of take me wherever that was going to take me. I think that was a more casual time, in terms of your job hunting ability. But, going out to LA with that in mind meant I didn't have, I didn't have this pressure on myself to do this immediately. It sort of let it sort of come to me to a certain degree. But again, I have to reference 84 because, for those listening, in 1984, there was no uploading your resume to an internet site. There was no everyone with cell phones and GPS. There was no Uber. You had a briefcase full of resumes. You had a map to get yourself around, and you had a list of addresses, and that's how you sort of hit the pavement. The naivety I had, having never been to LA, was thinking that, oh, well, it's a major city, so there must be subways and public transportation. Oh, no. So there was a lot of walking involved. To cut to the chase, because I had this open mind of just wanting a job in entertainment, I was prepared to pivot whenever I saw something. And I can sort of remember this as like it was yesterday. I was on a bus in Hollywood, and on my map said a place called Studio City, and like there must be a lot of studios if call something Studio City, so let me go to Studio City. I don't know how many of you have been to LA, but in 1984, if you took a bus from Hollywood over the Cahuenga Pass into the valley, the first entertainment company you will have seen was the old Hanna-Barbera studios. And Hanna-Barbera was the old animation studio that did Yogi Bear and Fred Flintstone and Johnny Quest. And I remember just seeing all those flags hanging off that building. And I said to myself, well, I don't know how they make cartoons, but these guys have more on TV than anyone else I'm going to be giving a resume to. So let me get off the bus here and sort of go in there. And I walked into Hanna-Barbera, and the receptionist, an African-American, lovely African-American woman who will never know how she changed the course of my life, said, oh, no, we're not hiring, but two companies that are always hiring. And she gave me the address of these two small independent animation companies. I guess she assumed because I was in Hanna-Barbera, I wanted a job in animation. I didn't dissuade her of that fact. All I heard was always hiring. And I ended up getting a production assistant job at one of these companies. And I remember even thinking then, I'll just do this until I get a real entertainment job. And I never left the industry. I worked at a lot of different studios. I've had a lot of different jobs, but two things that have always kept me in the animation industry was, number one, I became passionate about the art form. And number two, the people that I work with, no matter what job, no matter what studio, were always the most collaborative people, the most passionate about what they do. And I think perhaps the best thing about these people, especially when you sort of reference the entertainment industry, is like they didn't take themselves too seriously. And so for me, my journey through starting in production and going to recruiting and going to development and then over to current series and to the role I'm in now was just sort of following the path that was laid out for me just in terms of the industry. The interesting thing about the animation industry, when I started, it was still Saturday morning cartoons and after school cartoons. In 5 to 6 very short years, home video would become a thing. 24/7 cable would become a thing. The resurgence of Walt Disney Features would become a thing. The creation of DreamWorks would become a thing. All these things happened within a matter of, in less than a decade, which completely changed our industry. So to that end, I mean, I think I was very fortunate to get in when I did, because, at that time, it was just like, you want to be in animation? Okay, come on in. I don't remember even talking about my schooling. I don't even remember talking about it. It was a matter of just putting yourself out there. And I guess that's the one piece of advice I would give. I know that, obviously in terms of pandemic, there are certain limited options in terms of how you can get out there now. But I always think that, I know we have social media and emails and whatnot, but personal touch is still very important. I just think that when you have opportunity, if you're looking to get a job in LA, you need to go to LA and at least scout around and meet people and get one-on-one interaction, because, we all get a lot of emails, we get a lot of outreach, and, it does help, in terms of meeting people, but ultimately everything being equal, I'm going to remember the people who I had a real face-to-face with, I'm going to remember the people who I met at different events and panel discussions. And there will be a day when this will come back around where we will be able to sort of meet face-to-face. But I think it's important to remember that we are overtaxed with the just amount of people and information that comes into us now on a day-to-day basis. It still feels really good to have a one-on-one conversation with somebody and get to know people in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so. So fast forward to now, and you're looking at new talent. You're looking at trying to bring people in. You're looking at trying to make sure that your workplaces reflect the kind of diversity that you want the country to acknowledge and move towards. And that means reaching out to different populations. And Jay, you talked about, going to HBCUs, like Howard that I went to, and a few others out there that are many out there, and HSI, Hispanic Serving Institutions. So we bring people in. So then how do you keep them? Because these days we're struggling not just, and we're doing it at the university level too. We're struggling not just with recruitment, but retention, with bringing people into the workplace and keeping them there. So Tara, talk to me a little bit about how to create a culture that promotes retention in the workplace.
Yeah. Firstly, do those people feel seen and heard? Are there just two of them? Or do they have colleagues? Are you cultivating an organization where you're going to have enough people that they don't feel like the oddballs? Are you asking them what they want to do, how they may want to move up in the company? Are you providing opportunities for upward mobility? From an editorial standpoint, are you listening to their story ideas? Because they're going to have different story ideas than everyone else. And when they have ideas, are you putting those things into action? When people feel like they are part of the organization and they are contributing something to it, especially if they're able to talk about issues that hit close to home, they're going to feel like, okay, there's a reason for me to be here. I'm contributing something that's important to me. I'm going to ride this out. But if you're just hiring for the sake of numbers and they just become an invisible person, or you have them in kind of low rate jobs with no opportunities for growth, then that's not going to work.
Absolutely. Jay, what's your advice around that?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of a paradox here, right? On the one hand, I think we all recognize that we have to hire more people of color, Black people, brown people, LGBTQ. We just need more. We just need more diversity in who we bring into our studio. Because you mentioned earlier, specifically, we need to create content, and our organization needs to look like the audience that we're serving and the world at large. So there's obviously that aspect to it, but you can hire all the people of color you want. If the culture is not going to be open to that, then, in essence, what I always say is just like, so instead of having 2 people banging their heads against the wall, you're going to have 7 people banging their heads against the wall. Because if you're bringing in people and you're just going on a sort of a hiring rampage, as I call it, but you haven't sort of changed the culture, then those people coming in, they're going to ask questions about who's there and like, so what do you see? What do you know? And, so when you want to talk about retention, that's going to be top of mind in terms of that. Then maybe that initial sort of like, oh, I'm glad I'm here and everything. But then it's just like, oh, really? Is that the cause? So, so you have to, it's parallel tracks, you can't wait to change your culture before you hire people, because some of these people are going to be very influential in changing that culture. But the culture you have to change that from the inside going forward. So to what Tara referenced, and we all sort of agree, it's just like, well, how do you retain people? Well, you retain them by caring about them. You retain them by acknowledging them. You retain them by making sure that they feel like they belong, that they have a voice at the table, that it's not just an issue of optics. We're going to hire these people so that we can make it look like, we have inclusion and diversity in our workplace. It's one of those things where, and this is the challenge of the work, right? I mean, in the process of doing this, doing the more hiring, but sort of trying to, work together to change your culture, it's not a quick fix. So there's going to be overlap here. There's going to be some messiness. There's going to be some awkwardness in it. You just, from my point of view, you just have to sort of keep reminding senior leaders of the urgency, and you have to keep reminding them to sort of push forward on this. And let's not get complacent because it doesn't seem as urgent. I always sort of say, just because CNN's not playing the protests anymore, it doesn't mean the protests aren't still happening. So don't get lulled into this situation that's like, oh, okay, that stuff passed. Now we can sort of get back onto our business. I think I got like the biggest part of my job right now is just being that sort of beacon for saying, by the way, let's keep moving on this. And that's, again, we're just sort of referencing, I'm happy to do that job because I think people sometimes get trapped in that sort of positioning. But we've made strides, and I think that's what we sort of hang on to here right now. And, you can change it overnight. We're, studios and whatnot are still going to be challenged by holding on to their talented Black and underrepresented employees who, have either gotten offers other places or whatnot. So we have to make sure that we are enticing, to those same people to either want to stay, or new people coming in who will sort of, ring the bell to say, this is a great place to work. And and while there's more work to do, again, it sort of goes back to that intent of wanting to make sure that the needle has now moved, that we're all moving the needle to make sure that you do feel like you belong the moment you step into the studio.
Yeah. We seem to forget that one function of the lack of diverse voices in our media operations is the fact that the few who are there are going to have a lot of offers. They're going to have a lot of different offers from different places, things like that, a lot of different choices. And if your organization isn't including them, and we often talk about inclusion in this way. If you're not including them, then yeah, there's going to be options. They may exercise those options. They may take their talents to someplace else, and so that's always very, I think, kind of top of mind. One thing I wanted to ask, and we have about 10 minutes, so if you've got a question, I'm going through a few of the questions now, and one from Brian Ives. This is a very good question. He says he graduated from Newhouse, but works in international education. Something now that we find frequently is that students from overseas look at US-based media organizations for leadership or ideas about what American culture is and what they should themselves aspire to doing. What responsibility do you think American media companies, as leaders in the global marketplace of content and ideas, what do they have in terms of helping to move the world towards a larger, inclusive, more diverse mindset and a more diverse understanding? Tara, why don't you take that first?
I think we have a major responsibility because our history is perhaps more painful in that area than anywhere else in the world. So we have colleagues in Europe that are like, oh, I didn't know this race issue was so sensitive, but obviously here we would know that. So I think we have a responsibility both to change the people who are telling the stories and the stories we're telling. So we have to be that person in the room, as Jay mentioned, like, hey, you posted your black square on social media 6 months ago, but this is still an issue. And here's what I think we should talk about now. Here's the story that I think we should focus on now. And I think, with the George Floyd example specifically, one of our sister publications got some backlash because they started covering the riots and the looting and, oh, retailers are facing damage without having said, hey, here's why they're facing damage. Here's what happened. Here's the issue. So I think we have a responsibility to shape those narratives in a way that could help compel change and help people who may not be so tied to this history to understand it better and to understand the issues so we can move forward.
Thank you. Jay?
Yeah, and I would echo that. And in fact, obviously, whether it's a company like Disney or some of the other entertainment studios that have global reach to begin with, I mean, one could argue that we are, to a certain degree, an international company because, our footprints can be found throughout the world. Disney product, both the content that we create domestically, but even those that we create overseas at our different organizations across the world. This applies to the entire organization. So, and especially in the kids business. I sort of touched upon this earlier in terms of how important it is for kids to see positive reflections of themselves in everything that we do. So that in and of itself in the kids space, I think is a gigantic responsibility that we have. So yeah, indeed, I feel that's the case. And, I think going forward, and again, you try to find silver linings when you can, right? There's a lot of bad things that have happened in this year, and you need to acknowledge that. But at the same time, you also have to now figure out a way to make the sacrifice that people have had, worthwhile to the degree that it can be, right? And I think that from us, from the standpoint of this sort of makes us more cognizant of the type of shows that we want to greenlight, the people who are pitching these shows, the type of people who are working on these shows, the content in and of itself, the storytelling, the longer and deeper search for more authentic stories that come from a different lens, from a different experience, from a group of people who aren't necessarily or haven't been in a position to present these stories to us. All of that sort of will impact, in going back to the gentleman's question about sort of stepping up to the plate here. You do that by example. You do that by putting out product that is socially responsible, is inclusive, represents different experiences, different characters, different cultures, different races. And I think, again, when you sort of talk about if you're going to plant the flag for authentic storytelling, you can't help but do that if you want to be able to say that, yes, we are the authentic storytellers. So that's where I think our focus is. And I think we're doing a better job, but I think everybody can agree that there's more work to be done, and I think that's the people that we are starting to look for to put that into the front lines are starting to line up, and again, I feel like there's a sincerity to it, and the conversation continues, and if we have opportunity to come back again and as I said earlier, have the conversation, then it'll be interesting to see how our answers have stayed the same or changed, or see where we're at that point. So
yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting to see going forward. Is there a backlash that we might have to deal with going forward? Are there things that are going to be taking place? I saw in the New York Times this week that there's a raging discussion apparently about systemic racism and whether or not there is such a thing in our society, and of course there is. But I wonder what in all of this though you have in terms of advice for us in the Newhouse School to prepare students for a more diverse workplace. We only have a few minutes, and I'm sounding like a broadcaster, but if you can give me a few minutes on each of you on what you think institutions like the Newhouse School should be doing right now to prepare people. Jay, you want to start first?
Sure. I don't, one of the things that you had mentioned before, Hub, in terms of when the idea of retention came up, you said, hey, it's problematic in the university world as well. So I think, I think it sort of starts there. I'm trying to think back to when I was in school and how many professors did I have who were Black? Two come to mind at this point, and
I know the two.
and the reality for that is, like, I didn't give it much thought then. It was what it was, but now as we're having this discussion and this conversation, I think students in general learn from what they experience and what they see. So, if they don't see people who look like them who are sharing their experience or teaching them certain things, then that sort of follows them and stays with them as they move up to the work world. And, perhaps that's why it became somewhat, I won't say easy necessarily, but at least gave me the ability to compartmentalize the fact that I don't see a lot of people that look like me in the entertainment industry, because I didn't see a whole lot of people who looked like me in my schooling, So, quite frankly, I would start there, because the more you can sort of create that sort of feeling of this is what work life can and feel like, in the university setting, is what's going to best prepare them for when they step out of that into the workplace.
Yeah, Tara, just about a minute left, but your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I would agree with Jay. I don't think I had any Black professors when I was at Newhouse. So I think just like the onus is on the workplace to make sure it's inclusive from a leadership standpoint all the way down to the staff. I think, the more that we can hear from leaders and learn from leaders of color, it will help students shape their perspectives, and they should have more people of color among their peers as well. Just the more that we're not seeing ourselves as the only people in the room, I think the more natural it'll become for everyone involved.
Right. Thank you, Tara. Thank you both, Tara and Jay, for this conversation. It's been marvelous, and we are on it over here at the Newhouse School. There's going to be more to come, and I appreciate both of you in terms of everything that you've had to say here today, and thank all of you for joining us on this conversation. There'll be more in the future. Stay tuned. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you so much, Hub. Good to see you.
Thank you.